Chapter 10 Flames on the Mountain. Dawn broke cold and pale as Azural's growing band of allies gathered in the shadow of the mountain. The air was sharp and thin, carrying the faint scent of snow and rock, and the world was silent, but for the low murmur of voices and the quiet rustle of weapons being drawn and checked. Azural stood at the forefront, her eyes fixed on the looming peak before them, where one of Vyuva's hidden strongholds awaited. The mountain temple was said to be his most well-protected, a fortress woven with dark magic, one of the places where he drew power to extend his influence over the lands below. It was dangerous, a place built to intimidate and deter, but Azural felt only the steady pulse of fire in her blood, a fierce readiness that sharpened her senses and settled her resolve. The last encounter with Vyuva's messenger had rattled her, but her anger had only hardened. Talvar joined her side, his armor strapped tight, his sword sheathed and ready. His gaze followed hers up the mountain path, his face calm but tense. This will be unlike anything we've faced so far. Vyuva will have guards in place, creatures or traps to deter intruders. We need to be prepared for anything. Azural nodded, her jaw set. We've broken his hold before. We'll do it again. Soraya moved up beside them, her expression thoughtful. The magic here will be thick, tangled with Vyuva's power. We may be able to use it against him if we're careful. But be wary. This close to the source, his influence will be stronger. He'll sense us the moment we enter, and he won't hesitate to defend his power. Azural turned to the gathered fighters, a mix of villagers, rebels and others who had joined their cause, each bearing the marks of survival and struggle. She saw fear in their eyes, but also determination, a shared sense of purpose that flickered like embers waiting to catch. They looked to her, and she felt the weight of their trust, their need for something to believe in. She raised her voice, letting it carry over the still morning. Today we strike at the heart of Vyuva's corruption. We fight not just for ourselves, but for everyone he's taken from us, our families, our homes, our hope. We've seen his darkness, but we carry our own fire. We can break him piece by piece until there's nothing left but ashes. The murmurs of agreement grew louder, and she saw the fear wane as her words took root, transforming doubt into resolve. She turned to Talvar and Soraya, giving a sharp nod. "Let's move." They began the ascent, the narrow mountain path winding steeply upward, each step carrying them closer to the dark temple that loomed above. As they climbed, Azural could feel the weight of Vyuva's presence, an oppressive force that seemed to thicken the air. Her fire responded, sparking in her veins, as though her very body rebelled against the dark magic saturating the mountain. At the edge of a sharp cliff, the path widened, and there, blocking the entrance to the temple, stood a group of Vyuva's guards. They were clad in blackened armor, faces obscured by helms bearing his twisted emblem, a sun split by shadow. Their weapons glinted in the weak light, and their stances were rigid, disciplined. It was clear they had been waiting. One of the guards stepped forward, his voice echoing coldly. "Turn back. None approach the mountain of Vyuva and live." Azural felt the fire flare within her, her anger sparking like a struck match. She raised her hands, blue flames licking at her fingers, and met the guard's gaze with defiance. "Then you should have brought more men." Without waiting for a response, she unleashed a burst of flame, her fire searing through the air as it struck the guards. The blast forced them back, and her allies surged forward, weapons drawn, meeting the guards in a clash of steel and fury. The battle unfolded around her, chaotic and fierce. Talvar moved through the fray, his sword a silver blur as he struck down one guard after another, his movements precise and deadly. Soraya weaved her own spells, whispers of magic swirling around her as she created barriers to protect the fighters, and unleashed tendrils of shadow to entangle Vyuva's soldiers. Azural fought with an intensity she hadn't known before, her flames hotter, sharper, her control tighter. Each blast of fire sent her enemies reeling, her anger fueling her strength. The guards fell back, their formations breaking under the relentless assault. But for each one that fell, another seemed to emerge from the shadows, their dark armor blending with the mountain's harsh terrain. They pressed onward, carving a path up the mountain and leaving scorched earth and fallen enemies in their wake. But as they neared the temple entrance, Azural felt the dark magic intensify, a sickly pulse of energy that radiated from within the stone walls. Her skin prickled with unease, but she forced herself to keep moving, her fire blazing in defiance of the darkness. Inside the temple, the air was colder, heavy with a thick, cloying scent that made her skin crawl. The stone walls were etched with dark runes, pulsing faintly as if alive, each one connected to the next in an intricate pattern that seemed to wind deeper into the temple's depths. Shadows slithered across the floor and walls, as though aware of their presence. Talvar glanced at her, his expression wary. This place feels wrong. His power is everywhere. Soraya nodded, her face tense. These runes are part of a web, a binding spell that strengthens his influence. If we can break the central point, we could shatter his hold on this region. Azural looked down the dark corridor ahead, her fists clenched. Then we go to the heart of it. They moved forward, her allies close behind, their footsteps echoing in the stone hall. The shadows seemed to gather around them, thickening as they descended deeper into the temple. The air grew colder still, and Azural felt her fire struggle against the darkness, as if something were actively trying to snuff it out. They reached a wide chamber at the heart of the temple, its center dominated by an altar carved from black stone, covered in intricate symbols that glowed with dark energy. Shadows coiled around it, writhing as though alive, and in the center of the altar stood a crystal, black as night, pulsing faintly. Soraya's eyes widened. The Heartstone, this is the source of his magic here. If we destroy it, his influence over this region will shatter. But as she spoke, the shadows gathered, swirling into a single form, a towering figure cloaked in darkness, his face obscured, but his eyes burning with a familiar malice. Azural's heart clenched as she recognized him, even in this twisted form. Vuva. His voice echoed through the chamber, cold and mocking. You think you can break me with such feeble tricks? His gaze landed on Azural, and she felt the weight of his malice press against her, as if it sought to suffocate her very soul. You may carry fire, Azural, but I am the darkness that consumes all light. You are nothing to me. Azural's fists ignited, blue flames crackling along her arms as she met his gaze without flinching. I am more than what you tried to make me. I am the fire that will consume you. Vuva's laughter echoed, a sound filled with contempt. You cannot control the power within you. It is chaos, and it will destroy you long before it ever reaches me. Azural's jaw clenched, her anger rising to a fever pitch. She could feel the flames building, a storm of fire that surged within her, fierce and hungry. She stepped forward, drawing on every ounce of her strength, focusing the flames into a single fierce point. With a shout, she hurled a torrent of fire at the Heartstone. The flames struck the crystal, searing into it, and the dark energy around it flared, twisting and writhing as though in agony. Vuva's form wavered, his eyes narrowing in fury as the power he had woven into the temple began to unravel. No! His voice was a roar of fury and fear, echoing through the chamber as the crystal began to crack, splintering beneath the force of Azural's fire. Talvar and Soraya joined her, their combined magic and strength bearing down on the Heartstone, the air thick with the raw energy of their assault. The crystal shattered with a final, deafening crack, sending shards of dark energy exploding outward. Vuva's form flickered, his presence dissipating with a scream that reverberated through the chamber. The darkness lifted, the oppressive weight of his magic fading as the last of the shadows burned away. Azural stood in the center of the chamber, breathing heavily, her flames still simmering at her hands, but her expression was one of triumph. Talvar rested a hand on her shoulder, his voice filled with quiet admiration. You did it, Azural. His hold over this place is broken. Soraya nodded, a faint smile on her lips. "This is a victory, Azural, one he did not expect. You've weakened him, made him vulnerable, but he will come for you now, more relentless than ever." Azural looked at the shattered heartstone, her resolve hardening. "Let him come. I am done hiding from his shadows. If he seeks to break me, he will find himself burned by the fire he tried to control." They left the temple together, descending the mountain as the morning light began to break over the land, a new dawn rising on a land that had begun to shed Viova's shadow. And as they walked, Azural knew that this was only the beginning. The final battle was yet to come, but she would be ready, for she was the fire, and she would not be extinguished. The morning after the destruction of the mountain temple dawned bright, the air crisp and alive with the scent of fresh pine and damp earth. Azural's band moved quietly, leaving the smouldering ruin behind them, though the weight of their victory lingered in each step. She could feel it, a subtle yet undeniable shift in the essence of the land itself. Viova's grip here had weakened, his shadow seeming thinner, more fragile, yet still lurking at the edges of her awareness. Each step forward was a reminder that he would not abandon his hunt. His darkness would gather, waiting to strike. They gathered in a secluded glen not far from the temple, the morning light filtering through the trees in faint broken beams. A tension hung in the air, a mix of triumph and apprehension. Azural paced at the edge of the clearing, her fists clenched, blue flames pulsing under her skin as she tried to shake the sense of coming retaliation. Viova would answer their strike with a force greater than any they had yet seen. She could feel it, a dark cloud of malice that stirred just beyond sight. Talvar approached, his gaze steady, respect evident in his eyes. "You did well, Azural," he said quietly. "Few could have faced him like that and emerged unscathed. You've shown everyone that Viova isn't invincible. That's something they'll remember." Azural met his gaze, her jaw set, tension visible in her posture. "He may not be invincible, but he's far from finished. We've struck him, yes, but now he knows our strength. He'll be more dangerous than ever." Soraya joined them, her expression thoughtful, almost somber. "Azural's right. Viova will not rest. His darkness is like a poison. It spreads, infects, turning the land itself against us. Breaking his hold here was only the beginning. He'll focus all his energy on us now, seeking to crush this rebellion before it can truly rise." Azural's gaze swept across her gathered allies, wearied from the night's battle, but with a fierce glint in each eye. "Then we gather more strength. We need allies. Others who hate him, who have reason to fight. Villages like the one we saved, survivors hiding in the forests, anyone who has lost something to his darkness." Soraya nodded thoughtfully. "I know of a few places where we could find such people. There are strongholds hidden in the northern reaches, places where warriors still resist, even if their numbers are small, but travelling there will be dangerous. Viova will send his agents after us." Talvar's face darkened, a grim understanding settling in his gaze. "He'll try to divide us, strike when we're at our weakest. We have to be vigilant." Azural looked over her group, her resolve hardening as she saw the same spark within them. Though tired and battle-worn, they each carried a fierceness, a determination that mirrored her own. They believed in her, she realized, and she would fan that spark into a fire that even Viova's darkness could not snuff out. "We'll split up," Azural decided, her voice ringing with authority. "Soraya, take some of our fastest scouts to the northern strongholds. Find those who are willing to fight, and tell them what we've done here. Talvar, lead a group south, to spread word of Viova's broken stronghold. Let people know he's not untouchable." Talvar nodded. "And you?" Azural clenched her fists, feeling her inner fire surge. "I'll go east to the river settlements. I've heard stories of resistance there, people who have fought off Viova's men before. I'll find them and bring them back. When we're all gathered, we'll strike at his strongest fortress." Soraya's eyes held a flicker of concern. "If we divide ourselves, we'll be more vulnerable. Vuva may sense the separation and attack. Azural met Soraya's gaze, her expression unyielding. He'll attack whether we're together or apart. If we're divided, we move faster, find more people willing to stand against him. We can't wait for him to choose the moment of our fight. We have to force his hand. Talvar inclined his head, his respect for her clear. We follow your lead. The rest of the morning was spent in preparation. Fighters exchanged supplies, sharpened their weapons, and gathered provisions for their journeys. Azural moved among them, offering words of encouragement, watching as their fears gave way to purpose. By the time she took her own supplies, she was met with nods of trust and a feeling of unity that filled her with fierce determination. Her path took her east, along an old river trail, winding through dense forests and rolling hills. The smell of damp earth rose with each step, and the shadows beneath the trees seemed to watch her, pressing close, heavy and expectant. She felt Vuva's presence here, his malice lingering like a sour taint in the air, as though the very trees and soil had been touched by his influence. But her fire pulsed with defiance, burning hotter as she pushed forward. By dusk, she reached the first of the river settlements, a small village nestled against the banks, its cottages sturdy yet worn, its people moving cautiously, casting wary glances at every shadow. The land here bore the scars of Vuva's power, crops sparse, soil hardened and resistant, as though rejecting the light itself. Azural stepped into the village square, her presence drawing curious yet suspicious eyes. Raising her voice, she let it carry over the murmurs. "I come with news of Vuva's defeat," she announced, steady and strong. "His mountain stronghold has been destroyed. His power weakens, and he knows it. I seek those who would stand against him, to end his shadow over this land, once and for all." A murmur rippled through the crowd, faces lighting with a mix of fear and hope. An older man with a scarred face and worn armor stepped forward, his gaze sharp and questioning. "Vuva is no easy enemy," he said, his voice roughened by age and experience. "Many have tried to fight him, but none have succeeded. What makes you think you can?" Azural met his gaze unflinchingly. "Because I have faced him and survived. I carry a fire that he cannot control. I have already broken his chains over one village, and I will continue until his hold over these lands is nothing but ash." The man studied her, skepticism warring with the glimmer of belief in his eyes. Slowly, he nodded. "Then you may have found an ally. There are those among us who would fight, if given a reason to believe." Azural inclined her head, her voice resolute. "Let this be your reason. We will not stop until he is gone from this land." As evening deepened, the villagers gathered to hear her story. She spoke of the temple battle, the fire she had unleashed, and the allies she had gathered. For the first time in years, they heard words filled with promise. Words that ignited a spark of resistance against the darkness they had known. Later that night, Azural sat in the village's small meeting hall, her thoughts restless. She felt the weight of responsibility pressing down, the lives that now looked to her as their light against Vuva's shadow. Doubt gnawed at her, whispering that she was just one, that her power was raw, that the darkness might consume her before she reached her goal. But as she stared into the small fire crackling in the center of the room, a fierce resolve stirred within her. She had ignited a flame within these people, a fire that would spread until it could no longer be contained. A quiet knock sounded at the door, and she looked up to see the older man standing there, his face lit by the firelight, his gaze thoughtful. "I've gathered those willing to fight," he said. "Not all believe, not yet, but they will follow you for now." Azural nodded, rising to her feet. "Then tomorrow we move on. Vuva will know we're here soon enough. We can't afford to stay in one place." The man's gaze lingered on her, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "You carry a heavy burden, Azural. Vuva will stop at nothing to break you, but I see a fire in you I haven't seen in a long time. If anyone can stand against him, perhaps it's you." Azural met his gaze, her voice filled with quiet conviction. I don't plan on stopping until he's gone. For every person he's taken, for every life he's ruined, he will pay." The man inclined his head, a faint smile on his weathered face. "Then you have our loyalty. Lead us, and we'll stand with you." As the man left, Azural sat by the fire, feeling its warmth seep into her bones, steady and fierce. She thought of Talvar, of Soraya, of those who had placed their trust in her, and felt her resolve solidify. Vuva's power was vast, his reach deep, but she knew now he was not invincible. Piece by piece, stronghold by stronghold, she would dismantle his empire. With dawn would come new allies, new fires to stoke, and as she drifted into a light sleep, she could almost hear the whispers of those she had freed, voices that promised they would stand with her until the end.